May 20, 1942. Station Hypo Basement, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The message quivered slightly in Lieutenant Commander Thomas Deere's weary hands as he examined the decoded Japanese text, fully aware that these words could shape the outcome of the Pacific War. The enemy fleet composition at AF included 2 aircraft carriers, 7 cruisers, and numerous destroyers. Through bleary eyes that hadn't seen rest in 3 days, he scrutinized the intercept that had just emerged from their IBM tabulating machines, Operational Order 14, containing Admiral Yamamoto's complete battle plan for what the Japanese assumed would be their decisive triumph. In a windowless basement beneath Pearl Harbor's administrative building, a team of cryptanalysts had accomplished what the Imperial Japanese Navy deemed mathematically impossible. They had broken JN-25, Japan's most complex naval code, completely unbeknownst to the Japanese. Commander Joseph John Rochefort shuffled across the basement floor in slippers and a red smoking jacket, a robe he had worn so many days in succession that his staff no longer noticed. His desk sign read, "You don't have to be crazy to work here, but it helps." Yet this disheveled exterior concealed the most brilliant code-breaking mind in the U.S. Navy. What none of the Japanese admirals planning their massive operation realized was that this moment would spark the most catastrophic intelligence oversight in naval history, a systematic blindness to code compromise that would eventually doom the Imperial Navy. Rochefort's team in the freezing basement, nicknamed the dungeon for its poor ventilation and constant chill, processed 140 Japanese messages daily. By the end of May, they would handle even more during the critical days leading to Admiral Chester Nimitz's Midway directives. The Japanese, supremely confident in their cryptographic superiority, continued transmitting their most sensitive operational plans over a system they deemed unbreakable, unaware that American cryptanalysts were intercepting every communication. The mathematics of Japanese defeat were being determined not on battlefields, but on IBM punch cards in a Pearl Harbor basement, a methodical dismantling of Japanese strategic planning through the systematic cracking of a code the Imperial Navy would trust until the war's conclusion. JN-25 had been introduced by the Imperial Japanese Navy on June 1, 1939, replacing a system in use since 1931. To Japanese cryptographers in the Navy's 4th Department, this represented the pinnacle of code security, a 2-layered system so intricate that breaking it would require computational power that did not yet exist. The code initially contained roughly 30,000 code groups, expanding to nearly 45,000 by 1942, each a 5-digit number divisible by 3, a feature meant to serve as a garble check to identify transmission errors. Ironically, this mathematical safeguard provided American cryptanalysts with their initial foothold. Words, phrases, and even individual syllables were first encoded using a massive codebook, then disguised with false addition using random numbers from separate cipher tables containing 50,000 potential additives. Captain Ito Tsuno, head of the Japanese Navy's Communications Security Section, personally oversaw JN-25's development. In post-war interrogations, he admitted, "We believed the system was absolutely secure." The possibilities were astronomical. With tens of thousands of code groups and 50,000 additives, the combinations exceeded anything that could be analyzed by human computation. Yet the Japanese had committed a fatal oversight. They had never imagined that the Americans would repurpose commercial IBM tabulating equipment, machines designed for census data and accounting, for cryptanalytic purposes. These machines could sift through millions of combinations, detect patterns invisible to human analysts, and perform calculations in hours that would have taken mathematicians years to complete manually. When JN-25B replaced JN-25A on December 1, 1940, just over a year before Pearl Harbor, American cryptanalysts confronted the harsh reality that months of prior effort were effectively obsolete. They had to start over, reconstructing their understanding of the new system while the threat of war loomed over the Pacific. By the morning of December 7, 1941, they had reconstructed just enough to read perhaps 10 to 15% of intercepted messages, enough to sense heightened Japanese naval activity, but insufficient to predict the precise strike location. Station Hypo occupied what one visitor described as the most oppressive military workspace in the Pacific. Its basement location meant no windows, no natural light, and increasingly stale air as the day wore on. The constant hum of IBM machines, mixed with cigarette smoke from chain-smoking analysts, created an almost unbearable environment for newcomers. Yet Rochefort had assembled what Admiral Nimitz would later call the most valuable intelligence unit in naval history. The team was small, 30 to 50 personnel at its peak during the Midway crisis, but included some of the Navy's most exceptional minds. Lieutenant Commander Wesley Hamright, whose resemblance to actor Wallace Berry belied his analytical genius, would often work for 48 hours straight, sustained only by coffee and sheer determination. Lieutenant Joseph Finnegan, dubbed the team's Babe Ruth for his cryptanalytic prowess, had barely survived the Pearl Harbor attack aboard USS Tennessee. Rescued from the burning battleship, he poured his desire for vengeance into code-breaking with an intensity that even Rochefort found alarming. Finnegan would later achieve the critical breakthrough in decoding the Japanese daytime cipher, working backward from intercepted weather reports to unlock operational dates. Marine Major Alva Redwell, chief translator, was a mathematical savant who never finished high school but possessed an intuitive grasp of Japanese language patterns invaluable to the team. Witnesses described him absorbed in text, green eye shade pulled low, cigar clenched between his teeth. Commander Thomas Deere, the mathematical genius behind many breakthroughs, maintained a sign that epitomized the dungeon's spirit. After particularly grueling sessions, witnesses described him emerging unshaven, bloodshot-eyed from lack of sleep, barely able to stand. By May 1942, the team had reconstructed enough of JN25BS code groups and additives to read roughly 40% of intercepted traffic, insufficient for verbatim translation, but adequate for gisting, or grasping the general meaning and operational significance of Japanese messages. The repurposing of IBM equipment for cryptanalysis represented a revolutionary advance that the Japanese had never anticipated. Station Hypo employed IBM 601 multiplying punches, sorters, collators, tabulators, and key punch machines capable of processing thousands of cards per hour, each card holding 80 columns of data representing intercepted code groups. The breakthrough came via systematic pattern recognition. Cryptanalyst Thomas Deere noticed that Japanese radio operators, despite orders to begin encoding at random points in their cipher tables, habitually started at convenient locations, page 1, line 1, or other easily remembered positions. This human tendency produced patterns IBM machines could exploit. A single IBM run in April 1942 revealed something extraordinary. Certain code groups appeared repeatedly at message beginnings. Hamright hypothesized these represented numerals, as Japanese messages often began with references like message number 473. Comparing these with an old Japanese diplomatic code confirmed the theory. The Japanese were using the same numeral encoding system they had considered obsolete. Custom modifications to IBM equipment were extraordinary. By spring 1941, the Navy had commissioned purpose-built machines with over 75 special attachments designed for cryptanalytic work. These machines could identify messages encoded with identical additive sequences in minutes rather than days. A Navy report noted that comparing two 200-letter messages by hand took 10 hours, whereas the IBM machines performed the task in under 3 minutes. The investment was staggering. The Navy spent hundreds of thousands of dollars annually on IBM rentals and custom modifications, and the machines consumed so much electricity that Station Hypo required a dedicated power supply. Without them, breaking JN25 would have been impossible. The Imperial Japanese Navy's confidence in JN25 bordered on absolute certainty, completely unaware of the vulnerability beneath their noses. Commander Yamamoto Yuji, a senior cryptographic officer, would testify after the war. We considered the Americans incapable of understanding our language at the level required for crypto analysis. Combined with our mathematical security, we believed JN25 was not just unbreakable, we believed the Americans wouldn't even attempt to break it. This arrogance permeated Japanese military thinking. The Naval General Staff's intelligence assessment in 1941 stated that fewer than 100 Americans possessed sufficient Japanese language skills for military translation, and none had the combination of linguistic and mathematical expertise required for crypto analysis. They were catastrophically wrong. The U.S. Navy had been systematically training officers in Japanese since the 1920s, sending them to live in Japan and achieve near-native fluency. The Japanese made another critical error in assuming that code security rested solely on mathematical complexity. They ignored the human factors that create cryptographic vulnerabilities. Radio operators under pressure used shortcuts. Tired clerks began encoding at convenient starting points. Weather stations sent reports at identical times using predictable formats. Supply officers transmitted requisitions with stereotyped language. Each pattern provided what crypt analysts call cribs, known or guessed plaintext that could unlock entire messages. Even more damaging was the Japanese Navy's institutional rigidity. The same culture that produced unwavering loyalty also prevented critical examination of security procedures. When unusual events occurred, American carriers appearing at precisely the right defensive positions, submarines lying in wait along secret routes, naval leadership attributed these coincidences to superior American reconnaissance rather than communications compromise. Post-war testimony revealed the depth of this delusion. Admiral Fuku Shigeru, Yamamoto's chief of staff, stated, even After the war, when Americans told us they had been reading our codes, many officers refused to believe it. They insisted there must have been traitors. April 28, 1942 marked the beginning of the end for Japanese cryptographic security. On that day, Station Hypo intercepted a message that electrified the basement crew. Japanese naval forces were ordered to complete all preparations and await further orders. The target was designated only as AF. Rashford had seen this designator before. His team had been tracking AF references for weeks, noting that whenever Japanese forces operated near Midway the designation appeared in their communications. But correlation wasn't proof, and Washington's Codebreakers at OP-20G insisted AF meant the Aleutian Islands, or even Hawaii itself. The debate raged through early May with Admiral Nimitz caught between conflicting intelligence assessments. Rashford needed proof. The solution came from Jasper Holmes, a submarine officer forcibly retired due to arthritis who had been recalled to serve in intelligence. Holmes understood Midway's critical vulnerability. The island's water supply depended entirely on a desalination plant. On May 19, Rashford proposed Holmes' deception to Edwin Layton, Nimitz's intelligence officer, using the secure underwater cable connecting Pearl Harbor to Midway. Impossible for the Japanese to tap, they would instruct Midway's garrison to broadcast an emergency message in plain language, reporting that their water distillation plant had suffered an explosion. The trap was set on May 20. Midway broadcast the fake distress call on frequencies the Japanese routinely monitored. Within 24 hours, Japanese intelligence at Quadeline intercepted the American message and immediately reported to Combined Fleet Headquarters. In JN-25, AF is short of fresh water due to failure of distillation plant. When Station Hypo decoded this Japanese message on May 22, the basement erupted. They had not only confirmed Midway as the target, but also proven beyond doubt that they were reading current Japanese operational traffic. The Japanese had swallowed the deception completely, never questioning why the Americans would broadcast such sensitive information in clear text. Knowing where the Japanese would attack was crucial, but Nimitz needed to know when. Japanese messages included date-time groups that were super-enciphered, encrypted separately before being encoded in JN-25. This additional layer had frustrated American crypt analysts for months. The breakthrough came through painstaking analysis of weather reports. Joseph Finnegan noticed that Japanese weather stations transmitted at precise times each day, and their reports always included the date and time of observation. By comparing hundreds of these messages with known transmission times, Finnegan and Wright gradually constructed a table that could convert the enciphered date-time groups back to readable dates. On May 24, the system yielded its secret. A message from Yamamoto specified end day as June 4 with the attack to commence at 0200 Tokyo time. Another intercept confirmed the Midway invasion force would arrive June 7, 3 days after the carrier strike. Edwin Layton, reviewing these decrypts, made his famous prediction to Admiral Nimitz. Admiral, the Japanese will attack Midway on June 4. They will approach from the northwest at bearing 325 degrees. They will launch their aircraft at 0400 local time from a position 175 miles from Midway. Nimitz studied his intelligence officer carefully before responding. You're confident in this assessment, Layton? Admiral, I'll be wrong by 5 minutes, 5 degrees, and 5 miles at most. On June 4, 1942, at 0534 local time, a PBY Catalina flying boat spotted the Japanese carrier force, bearing 320 degrees distance 180 miles from Midway. The intelligence had been virtually perfect. The crown jewel of Station Hypo's codebreaking came on May 20 with the interception of Operational Order 14. This massive 12-part message contained Yamamoto's entire battle plan, including force composition, timing, and coordination between the Midway attack and Aleutian diversion. The decoded sections revealed staggering detail. The first carrier striking force under Admiral Nagumo would approach Midway from the northwest with 4 carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. These ships would carry 248 aircraft. The invasion force would include 5,000 troops aboard 12 transports. Support forces would include 7 battleships, including Yamato, the largest battleship ever built. Crucially, intercepts in early May confirmed that two of Japan's newest carriers, Shikaku and Zuikaku, damaged at Coral Sea, would not participate. This reduced Japanese carrier strength from 6 to 4, dramatically improving American odds. Other intercepted messages filled in operational details. A May 13 communication revealed submarine deployments. Submarine Squadron 3 will establish patrol line 150 miles northwest of Hawaii by N-2 day. Knowing this, Nimitz ordered his carriers to leave Pearl Harbor on May 28 and 30 before the Japanese submarines arrived on June 2. Supply messages exposed the operation's massive scale. One intercept specified fuel requirements. Tanker group will provide 2,800 tons heavy oil, 1,200 tons aviation fuel at position 30 degrees north, 170 degrees east on N+3 day. Such details not only confirmed timing, but revealed vulnerability. The Japanese were operating at the extreme limit of their logistical capabilities. Not everyone believed station hypo-analysis. In Washington, Commander John Redmond headed OP-20G, the Navy's main crypt analytics center. And he fundamentally disagreed with Rashfort's methods and conclusions. Where Rashfort relied on linguistic understanding and intuition, Redman emphasized pure mathematical analysis. The Redman brothers, John in cryptanalysis, and his brother Rear Admiral Joseph as Director of Naval Communications, had powerful allies. They convinced Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, that Rashfort was a maverick, ignoring proper channels and feeding Nimitz unreliable intelligence. On May 14, OP-20G issued a formal intelligence estimate, stating the Japanese target was probably the Aleutian Islands, possibly the west coast of the United States. They accused Hypo of wish fulfillment, seeing what they wanted in ambiguous intercepts. The bureaucratic battle nearly derailed American preparations. Admiral King, who disliked Rashfort's unmilitary appearance and direct communication with Nimitz, was inclined to side with Washington. It took Nimitz's personal intervention, backed by the AF water shortage proof, to maintain focus on Midway. Even after Hypo's vindication at Midway, the Redman brothers sought revenge. They convinced King that Station Hypo had been lucky rather than good and that proper CRYP analytic work required Washington's centralized control. By October 1942, Rashford would be relieved of command and sent to oversee a floating dry dock, a humiliating end for the man who had made Midway victory possible. Breaking JN-25 required unprecedented international cooperation. The British Far East Combined Bureau, FACB, originally established in Hong Kong in 1935, had actually achieved the first breakthrough against JN-25 in 1939. John Tiltman at Bletchley Park identified the system's basic structure and the divisibility by 3 that marked all valid code groups. When Japan introduced JN-25B on December 1, 1940, the British made an immediate discovery that saved months of work. The Japanese had changed the codebook, but not the additive tables. This meant messages encoded in late November and early December could be compared to strip away the encryption layer. By March 1941, FACT had recovered nearly 3,000 code groups which they shared with the Americans. The Dutch contribution came from Khmer 14 at Bandung Technical College in Java, led by Lieutenant Commander Leo Brewer. The Dutch had been intercepting Japanese naval communications since 1936 and possessed unique insights into Japanese radio procedures. When Java fell in March 1942, Brewer and his team escaped to Australia with boxes of punch cards containing partially decoded messages. Station Caston Corridor made a crucial discovery before their evacuation. In March 1942, they determined that AF was the Japanese designation for Midway. Information they relayed to Station Hypo just before being evacuated by submarine. The 74 personnel of CAST were considered so valuable that they were evacuated in multiple submarine runs between February and April 1942. Eventually reforming as FUMAL in Melbourne. The coordination between these units was remarkable given the distances and primitive communications. Decoded messages were shared via secure cable, recovered code groups distributed through diplomatic pouches, and intercept coverage synchronized to avoid gaps. By May 1942, the Allies were intercepting approximately 60% of Japanese naval radio traffic, though they could only decode about 40% of what they intercepted. The Imperial Japanese Navy's inability to detect JN-25's compromise stemmed from institutional failures beyond mere overconfidence. The Navy's intelligence structure, divided between the 3rd Department Intelligence and 4th Department Communications, created bureaucratic walls that prevented comprehensive security assessment. Captain Itaro Tachibana, who headed the 3rd Department's American section, admitted after the war, "We had no mechanism to correlate operational failures with possible communications compromise." When American forces appeared at optimal positions, the operations department blamed poor reconnaissance. No one considered that the Americans might be reading our messages. The Japanese Navy's security procedures actually facilitated American codering. Message originators were required to include full titles and unit designations, providing contextual clues. Acknowledgement messages repeated key portions of original communications. Weather reports transmitted at identical times daily provided predictable cribs. Even physical security failures went unnoticed. The January 20, 1942 sinking of submarine found 124 in shallow water off Darwin should have triggered immediate concern. The submarine carried current code books that Australian divers might recover, yet the Japanese made no emergency code changes, assuming the water depth would prevent salvage. They were wrong. Australian divers recovered significant cryptographic material immediately shared with American coderers. On June 7, 1942, just 3 days after Midway, the Chicago Tribune published an article that should have destroyed American intelligence advantage. Under the headline, "Navy had word of plan to strike at sea," reporter Stanley Johnston revealed details obtainable only through codering. Johnston, who had been aboard the carrier Lexington when it sank at Coral Sea, had seen classified message traffic while recovering on the cruiser Chester. His article specified Japanese force composition, ship names, and operational intentions, information that screamed code compromise. President Roosevelt was furious. Considering prosecution under the Espionage Act, Navy Secretary Frank Knox wanted Tribune publisher Colonel Robert McCormick court-martialed despite his civilian status. The Navy prepared charges that could have resulted in the death penalty. Yet, incredibly, Japanese intelligence never noticed the article. No Japanese agent in America reported it. No neutral diplomat mentioned it. No German intelligence officer warned their Japanese counterparts. The revelation that should have prompted immediate changes to JN-25 passed completely unnoticed. The grand jury proceedings nearly caused more damage than the original article. Prosecutors would have to explain exactly what Johnston revealed and why it mattered. Testimony that would confirm American codering success. Using this danger, the Navy dropped all charges, leaving the Tribune unpunished, but the secret miraculously intact. For the Krypton analysts of Station Hypo, victory at Midway brought not celebration but intensified pressure. They knew the Japanese would eventually change their codes, potentially blinding American intelligence at a crucial moment. Everyday JN-25 remained readable was a gift that could end without warning. The psychological strain was enormous. These men knew when Japanese convoys would sail, where submarines would patrol, which islands would be invaded. Information that could save thousands of American lives. Yet using this intelligence too obviously would reveal the code compromise. Rashford established strict protocols for disguising intelligence sources. Every piece of information derived from codering had to have a plausible alternative explanation. If decrypts revealed a convoy route, commanders were told it came from submarine sightings. When coder breaking exposed invasion plans, the intelligence was attributed to captured documents. The strain showed on the Krypton analysts. Thomas Dyer developed chronic insomnia, unable to stop seeing code groups even when he closed his eyes. Wesley Wright suffered severe anxiety, convinced each day would bring the code change that would blind American intelligence. Joseph Finnegan began drinking heavily, trying to forget the Japanese messages describing American prisoners that he translated but couldn't act upon without revealing the source. No event better
illustrated both the power and peril of co-daring than Admiral Yamamoto's assassination on April 18, 1943. In early April, Station Hypo's successor organization decoded a message containing Yamamoto's complete travel itinerary for an inspection tour of Solomon Islands bases. The message, transmitted in JN-25D, specified that Yamamoto would arrive at Bali Island at 0945 on April 18 flying in a Betty bomber with 60 fighters. The precision was remarkable. Japanese staff officers had included every detail in what they believed was completely secure communication. Admiral Nimitz faced an agonizing decision. Yamamoto was Japan's most
brilliant naval strategist, architect of Pearl Harbor. His death would devastate
Japanese morale, but intercepting his flight at the exact time and location specified would clearly indicate code compromise. The decision went to President Roosevelt, who reportedly said simply, "Get him." American planners constructed an elaborate deception. P-38 Lightning fighters would fly a 435m interception route at wavetop height. Other patrols would operate in the area, creating the illusion of routine activity. Coast watchers would be credited with spotting Yamamoto's plane. On April 18, exactly as predicted, Yamamoto's plane appeared over Bougainville.
American P-38s shot down both
Betty bombers, killing Yamamoto and his staff. The Japanese Navy was devastated,
but incredibly they made only routine code changes.
A board of inquiry concluded that local commanders had been
careless with security, never suspecting the ambush resulted from code compromise. By late 1942, breaking JN-25 had evolved from art to industry.
The expanded
Station Hypo, renamed Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, FRUPAC, occupied an entire floor of a new building at Pearl Harbor. IBM machines ran continuously in air conditioned rooms. 3 shifts of CRYP analysts, translators, and analysts processed thousands of messages daily. The systematization was remarkable. Punch card operators, mostly young women recruited from Hawaii's commercial sector, entered intercepted code groups
at high speed. IBM machines sorted cards by frequency, identifying potential cribs.
CRYP analysts attacked identified weaknesses, recovering new code groups
and additives. Translators converted broken messages to English, while intelligence analysts synthesized information from hundreds of partial decrypts into coherent reports. Quality control became crucial. Every recovered code group was verified against multiple messages. Translation disputes were resolved by committee, with native Japanese speakers having final say. Intelligence reports included
confidence levels, distinguishing between confirmed facts and educated guesses.
The scale was staggering. By January 1943, FUPAC maintained a library of millions of punch cards. The IBM
machines performed millions of comparisons daily.
The monthly electricity bill exceeded that of a small city. Yet for all this mechanization, human intuition remained crucial. Only experienced linguists could deduce that certain code groups represented common Japanese phrases. Only analysts familiar with Japanese doctrine could interpret operational significance.
While Midway captured headlines, the systematic destruction of
Japan's merchant marine through code intelligence represented JN-25's most devastating impact. By 1943, American submarines were sinking Japanese ships faster than they could be replaced, strangling an island nation dependent on imports. The
intelligence advantage was decisive.
Decoded messages revealed convoy routes, schedules, and escort compositions. Submarine commanders received ultra intelligence directing them to specific coordinates where undefended tankers would appear. The Japanese, never
suspecting code compromise, attributed losses to the growing submarine force rather than intelligence failures.
Commander Richard O'Kane, skipper of USS Tang, received a decoded message in October 1944, revealing a convoy carrying aviation fuel from Borneo to the Philippines. Positioned perfectly by intelligence, Tang sank 7 ships in one night, depriving Japanese aircraft of desperately needed fuel during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The statistics were devastating. American submarines, representing less than 2% of Navy personnel, sank over 30% of Japan's warships and 60% of its merchant marine.
Much of this success came from code intelligence revealing not just where ships would be, but what they carried and how they were defended. By late 1944, Japan had lost so many tankers
that warships couldn't obtain fuel. Training was curtailed because aviation fuel was unavailable. Island garrisons starved because food transports never arrived.
The Japanese economy collapsed as raw materials stopped flowing.
All resulted from submarines guided by intelligence the Japanese never knew was compromised. Throughout 1943 and 1944,
evidence of code compromise accumulated to levels that should have been impossible to ignore.
American submarines consistently intercepted convoys at their most vulnerable points. American carriers appeared wherever Japanese planning assumed they wouldn't be. American forces concentrated against Japanese attacks while leaving other areas undefended. Vice Admiral Igaki Mate, Yamamoto's
successor, noted in his diary, "The enemy seems to have a sixth sense about our operations.
Every movement is countered, every plan anticipated. Yet even this near recognition failed to trigger comprehensive security review. The Japanese did make periodic changes to JN-25, introducing new variants roughly every 6 months. JN-25C appeared on May 28, 1942, too late for Midway. JN-25D lasted from August 1942 to March 1943. Each change temporarily reduced American readability, but never for more than a few weeks. The fundamental architecture
remained unchanged, and American CRYP analysts had become so proficient they could recover new code groups rapidly.
The Japanese Navy's faith in their codes survived even direct evidence. In November 1943, a decoded message revealed the exact route of a convoy carrying reinforcements to Rabaul. American destroyers intercepted and sank every transport.
Among the survivors was Commander Kato Tetsuo, a communications
officer who reported, "The Americans were waiting at the exact point where we changed course. They must have broken our codes." His report was dismissed as battle fatigue. Kato was reassigned to
shore duty and ordered not to discuss his delusions.
For the men and women who broke JN-25,
victory came with profound moral complexity.
They knew their success meant death for thousands of Japanese sailors who were simply serving their country.
Every decoded message revealing ship positions
translated directly into human casualties. Alva Laswell, the Marine translator, wrote in a private letter, "I decoded the message that led to Yamamoto's death. I had translated his writings, studied his thoughts. When I decoded his itinerary, I signed his death warrant. That knowledge haunts me."
The burden was particularly heavy when intercepts revealed hospital ships, prisoner transports, or refugee vessels. International law protected such ships, but positive identification often came only through decoded messages.
The crypt analysts faced impossible choices: reveal intelligence that could save civilians but compromise the code, or remain silent. Some messages revealed Japanese atrocities that couldn't be acted upon
without exposing the source.
Thomas Dyer later admitted, "We decoded messages about prisoner executions. We had to file them away knowing revelation meant losing access to all future intelligence."
The psychological toll manifested in various ways.
Some Krypton analysts became obsessed with perfection, terrified that errors might cost American lives.
Others developed emotional detachment, treating decoded messages as puzzles rather than military intelligence.
Many
struggled with survivor guilt, fighting the war in safety, while men they directed faced death.
Despite official neglect and bureaucratic persecution, history has vindicated Station Hypo's achievement. Admiral Chester Nimitz stated unequivocally, "Without the intelligence provided by
Rochefort and his team, the Pacific War would have lasted at least 2 years longer and cost hundreds of thousands
more lives." General Douglas MacArthur admitted, "The Navy's coders gave us eyes to see and ears to hear what the enemy planned.
They turned the Pacific from a vast unknown into a battlefield where we knew every enemy move in advance." Even Japanese military scholars acknowledge the decisive influence.
Professor Tanaka Hiroshi of the Japanese Defense University wrote, "The decryption of JN-25 was more catastrophic than any conventional military loss." Throughout the war, Japan faced an omniscient adversary who knew every operational plan.
The true measure of Station Hypo's accomplishment lies not in victories achieved, but in battles averted. Understanding Japanese intentions allowed American forces to focus resources where required while leaving other zones lightly defended. This economy of force, enabled by intelligence, permitted America to conduct a two-ocean war with resources that would have been insufficient without the code-breaking advantage.
Yet acknowledgement came gradually. Rochefort's treatment was particularly egregious. Despite Nimitz recommending the Distinguished Service Medal, Admiral King blocked it.
Rochefort was relieved of command in October 1942, reassigned to oversee a floating dry dock, never receiving another significant intelligence role. The medal finally arrived in 1986, 10 years after his death, presented to his son by President Reagan in a White House ceremony that could not erase 4 decades of institutional neglect. The revelation of American code-breaking success stunned Japanese naval officers more than any other aspect of defeat. During post-war interrogations, many refused to believe the claims until shown actual decrypted messages they had sent years earlier. The psychological impact was profound. They had been fighting an adversary capable of reading their most confidential communications. Admiral Fukuomi Shigeru, former Combined Fleet Chief of Staff, stated during his 1949 interrogation, "If we had known you were intercepting our messages, the entire war would have been conducted differently. We would have employed alternative strategies, assumed different risks.
We were fighting blindfolded."
Captain Watsunio, head of the Naval Intelligence Division, was even more blunt. "Our failure to detect code compromise was inexcusable. The indications were everywhere. Your submarines always in position, your carriers where we least expected them. We attributed everything to superior reconnaissance and refused to consider the impossible." The revelation triggered soul-searching that continues in Japanese military circles.
How could an intelligence service that had broken Russian codes during the Russo-Japanese War fail so completely to protect its own communications?
The answer lay in technological ignorance, institutional arrogance, and rigid thinking.
The Japanese never grasped the revolution represented by IBM machines. While they struggled with manual encryption, Americans processed millions of code groups electronically. The technological gap was enormous.
One side using antiquated methods while the other deployed cutting-edge systems. The decryption of JN-25 established principles still guiding signals intelligence. Today, the operation demonstrates that no code is impervious given sufficient intercepted traffic, computational capability, and human expertise. It proved the weakest link in any cryptographic system is human behavior, the shortcuts and patterns operators inevitably introduce under pressure. The collaborative model developed for JN-25, combining intercept stations, analysis centers, and distributed processing, became the template for modern signals intelligence. The Five Eyes alliance between the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand emerged directly from partnerships forged in breaking Japanese codes. Ethical frameworks developed at Station Hypo continue to influence intelligence operations. The principle of safeguarding sources and methods, even at tactical cost, remains paramount. Integrating signals intelligence with operational planning pioneered by Rochefort and Nimitz is now standard military doctrine. Most importantly, JN-25 demonstrated that intelligence superiority can compensate for material disadvantage. In June 1942, the Japanese Navy was superior in numbers, experience, and equipment. Yet American codebreakers neutralized these advantages, allowing numerically inferior forces to achieve decisive victory through superior information. Despite its catastrophic effects, the Japanese Navy's intelligence failure offers enduring lessons. Overconfidence that blinded Japanese cryptographers appears in every era's security assessments. Encryption considered unbreakable today may be trivial for tomorrow's quantum computers or AI. Japanese compartmentalization, which prevented comprehensive security reviews, mirrors modern bureaucratic divisions that impede effective counterintelligence. The human factors that compromise JN-25, habit, routine, predictability, remain vulnerabilities in contemporary cryptography.
The psychological dimension is sobering. The Japanese Navy could not conceive that their codes were compromised because such a notion challenged deeply held beliefs about Japanese supremacy.
Similar blind spots exist in every intelligence apparatus. Impossibilities made achievable through innovation or technological advance. Modern militaries study JN-25 as a cautionary tale, yet often miss its core lesson: the enemy you underestimate is most likely to defeat you. American cryptanalysts in the Pearl Harbor basement, dismissed by Japanese intelligence as incapable of understanding JN-25, systematically dismantled the Imperial Navy using mathematics and mechanical computation. In 1985, surviving Station Hypo members held their first and only reunion in San Antonio, Texas.
Fewer than 30 attended.
Age, distance, and death had claimed most of the original team. They gathered not as celebrated heroes but as elderly men whose greatest accomplishment remained largely unknown.
Thomas Dear, then 83, delivered the keynote address. "We were mathematicians and linguists, not warriors.
We fought our war with pencils and punch cards, not guns and bombs.
Yet we sank more Japanese ships than any task force, saved more American lives than any medical unit. We were invisible then and largely remain so now."
Joseph Finnegan, sober for 20 years yet bearing psychological scars, added, "Every Japanese message we decoded represented lives, Japanese sailors who would die, American pilots who would survive.
We celebrated successes knowing they meant death for enemies simply following orders.
That burden never leaves you." The reunion's most poignant moment came when the group raised a toast to Joe Rochefort, dead 9 years, still their spiritual leader. His son accepted a flag that had flown over Pearl Harbor on June 4, 1982, the 40th anniversary of Midway. The citation read simply, "To the man who made victory possible." The scale of the American code-breaking achievement is reflected in statistics. Station Hypo, 30 to 50 personnel during the Midway crisis, expanding to over 100 by late 1942 at Frupac. Total Pacific Cryptanalytic personnel 738 by December 1941, over 5,000 by war's end. 5 major processing centers across the Pacific.
IBM machines performing millions of comparisons daily.
JN25 recovery, December 1941, 10 to 15% partially readable, April 1942, 20%, May 1942, Midway, 40% code groups recovered, December 1942, 60% readability, by war's end, nearly complete recovery of most variants. Operational impact, Midway, for Japanese carriers sunk versus 1 American, submarine campaign, 1,314 Japanese vessels destroyed, merchant shipping, 60% of Japanese tonnage eliminated, hundreds of thousands of American lives saved. Japanese intelligence failures, 0 successful detection of code compromise, multiple warning signs ignored, no comprehensive investigation even after Yamamoto's assassination.
The Pacific Code battle exemplified early technological warfare.
While Japanese relied on printed codebooks and manual enciphering, essentially 19th century methods, Americans deployed advanced computational devices. IBM machines at Station Hypo could perform thousands of comparisons per hour, detecting patterns that would have taken human analysts months.
Custom modifications enabled cryptanalytic functions their designers never envisioned. Primitive by modern standards, revolutionary for its time.
The Japanese persisted in believing manual systems were more secure, failing to understand that mechanical computation could defeat mathematical complexity. By 1944, American analysts experimented with even more advanced tools, primitive computers using telephone switching equipment to attack super-enciphered code groups, rapid photographic copying of recovered code values, and near-instant intelligence sharing via radio teletype. Each innovation widened the gap between American capabilities and Japanese assumptions. Joe Rochefort died July 20, 1976, at Little Company of Mary Hospital, Torrance, California. In his final hours, too weak to sit up, he whispered in a last interview, "People ask if I'm bitter about my treatment.
I'm not."
The work was its own reward. Every Japanese message we decoded, every American life saved, that's my medal.
We proved that in modern war, information is more powerful than firepower. A small team in a basement defeated the Japanese Navy more completely than any fleet engagement could.
We sank ships with mathematics, dismantled plans with analysis, overcame strategy with intelligence.
The real lesson isn't code breaking, it's hubris.
The Japanese were so certain of their superiority they could not imagine being outsmarted. They confused complexity with security, tradition with strength.
They never realized that the moment you think you're safe is when you are most vulnerable.
I spent 3 years reading Japanese admirals' mail. It was the strangest intimacy, understanding the enemy better than they understood themselves.
I watched their empire collapse through messages they thought were secret. My only regret is that so many of my team died unrecognized.
They were heroes who could not be celebrated.
Warriors fighting with pencils and punch cards. History should remember them. The Japanese never knew we broke JN25. Even now, some refuse to believe it.
But we knew, and that knowledge was both triumph and burden. We changed history from a basement in Pearl Harbor. The story of JN25 and the men who cracked it stands as one of history's greatest intelligence achievements. A small team of American cryptanalysts, using primitive computers and extraordinary dedication, systematically dismantled Japanese naval communications security and altered the course of World War II.
The Japanese Navy never realized their most trusted code was fully compromised.
Over 3 years, through inexplicable defeats, they maintained absolute faith in a system that betrayed every move. This blindness, rooted in arrogance and institutional failure, cost Japan the war.
Americans who broke JN-25 received little recognition in their lifetimes.
Rochefort's career was destroyed despite his success. His team was dispersed and silenced, and their achievement remained classified for decades. Yet their invisible victory may have been the most decisive of the Pacific War. Today, in the era of digital encryption and quantum computing, JN-25 lessons remain vital. No code is unbreakable, no system perfectly secure.
Human factors, laziness, predictability, overconfidence remain key vulnerabilities.
Institutional blindness that prevented Japan from recognizing code compromise still threatens organizations confident in their own security.
Station Hypo's basement is now a storage room, its IBM machines long scrapped, its heroes mostly forgotten.
But their legacy endures in every intelligence operation, every code broken, every enemy message decrypted. They demonstrated that wars can be won through patience, brilliance, and methodical decryption.
The Japanese never knew the US Navy had cracked JN-25. That ignorance cost them their empire, fleet, and ultimately the war.
In intelligence history, few failures were more complete, devastating, or preventable than Japan's blind faith in a code broken by Americans in a Pearl Harbor basement, intercepting every message, knowing every plan, patiently awaiting the enemy's approach. Their story reminds us that in intelligence, the most dangerous adversary is not the one who knows your secrets, but the one you never suspect is listening. The Imperial Japanese Navy learned this too late, discovering only after surrender that American cryptanalysts had been reading their communications, directing their defeat, and ensuring the rising Sun Empire would never realize its Pacific ambitions.